I came across these ice fishers in Astana, which they there's a river that bisects the city, and that's where they mostly fish. And yeah, it was super foggy, and yeah, it was just a really visually interesting thing, and I really liked this kind of like discarded material being removed from one context and repurposed in another. So I photographed a handful of them when I was there the first time. This is actually from my first trip there.
Well, was there like when you were doing this project, other than like was there anything that surprised you? Any revelations?
I
Anything that
think the
kind of
variations of like bags and how many different ways there were to structure them. Like this one you can see has a seal on the um, seam where it was sewn together. Um, so just like yeah, these like little tricks for like insulation and stuff like that, I thought were super interesting.
so you were really fascinated by the ingenuity of it all,
Yeah, and like the
the
materiality
creativity.
of it and the when I was working on this project, like the actual fishing aspect of it wasn't super interesting to me. It was really
Yeah.
like the structures and their materiality and sort of like approaching them as these like ambiguous portraits. So yeah, when I see the project in the context of like agriculture or um, yeah, kind of looking at like the relationship between humans and animals,
Yeah.
which I feel like yeah, it's been kind of put in those contexts a few times before. It's always interesting to me because it's like something I wasn't like I wasn't really envisioning the project to be talking about that per se. So it's cool to see like yeah the different ways that it kind of connects to sort of different elements beyond what I maybe was consciously thinking of when I was photographing them.
Welcome to the show, Alexei.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad to have you on. I got introduced to your work from Steve, who was working with you on a project at Lab 27, the place where he's a curator at. And you're in a really cool group show with another guest that we had on this show, David Chancellor. And so like I was really excited to kind of have a little small connection there. So thanks for coming on. I'm glad to have you here.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. It's great to be on. Yeah, like I was telling you before, I've been following Urbanatica for a long time, like since I was in high school. And yeah, I've been writing Steve since then. So
That's
get
awesome.
to finally work with him on a project.
Yeah, he's one of those great guys that actually replies.
Yeah,
It
exactly.
might be a few days later, but he does eventually. Uh, yeah, he's great. Yeah, in that regard.
Yeah,
But
I was
we have a
just
lot. Go ahead.
Urbanatica was interesting, like at that time period as well. Like when I was in high school, because that was before like Instagram was really big. So there's just kind of like a different infrastructure for like engaging with photography.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's true.
but I feel like yeah, his blog like really showed me like a lot of foundational stuff.
Yeah, he talked to me a lot about those early days
Okay.
and kind of starting a blog at that time and how it just grew so fast. And it was like, you're right, it was before like Facebook and Instagram. It makes me wonder if like maybe that was the golden age of the internet. Like,
I think yeah,
yeah,
moving forward.
there was a naive kind of innocence about it. Other than you could follow any interest. We have a lot to look at. You have some great work, and you have that great series that was featured in that show about ice fishers. And then you have two other bodies of work. They're all kind of connected, and I love your aesthetic. And I'm really excited to kind of talk to you today. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation. But before we dive into that, go ahead and take a moment and kind of introduce yourself to the audience.
Yeah, my name's Aleksey Kondratyev, and I'm a photographer. I'm originally from Bishkek in Kyrgyzstan, and then I moved to a suburb of Detroit in the late '90s with my family because we got green cards through what was then the lottery program. Uh, and yeah, I grew up in Detroit, and then about 7 years ago, I moved out to LA to go to grad school. And yeah, that's where I've been based since then.
That's amazing. So, were you always kind of into photography, or how did that come about?
I took a class in high school, and I just got super interested in it. It's something I've been pretty passionate about since then.
How did you find the blog? Did somebody tell you about it? You found Urbanaut, the blog, Steve's blog. How did you come about it? Was it like a Yahoo search, an AOL search? Maybe I'm just kidding.
So I'm sure somebody told me about it. I
Yeah.
have friends a little bit more in the know on photo stuff, so he might have shown it to me. Been through Flickr as well. That was like a really big photo community in the
That's true.
it kind of like 2010 era.
Yeah, it's true. I remember that.
Yeah, like the way that people used to navigate the internet was so different because it wasn't all mediated through like one platform.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. It's Flickr is now, I've been reading a lot about Flickr and stuff like that. I remember it was also one of those like image sharing platforms, but it's also kind of been in the center of the AI conversation recently.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because that database was used to teach AI. From what I've been hearing, based on some articles. So, like, it's interesting that you're bringing up Flickr. So back, you said in high school, what kind of class was it? Was it a traditional photography? Like, were you doing darkroom stuff? Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it was just a traditional photography class. It was black and white darkroom stuff. I got into it through that, and then I really wanted to do color, like darkroom printing. So there's actually a community college near where I grew up, and yeah, the high school like had a program where you could like take a class there and get like you can leave early from school. So yeah, it was a pretty good deal. And yeah, so I started doing color printing, and that's I think when I kind of started taking it more seriously.
Color printing,
Yeah,
like by the time I was like, granted, I didn't go to, I didn't go to college until like later. I didn't go right out of high school, but color printing wasn't even available when I went
yeah.
to school.
Well, I'm really surprised that there was a color lab. Right there.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, you
Wow.
could just kind of keep taking the classes over and over again to get access to it. So that's what I did for 4 or 5 years or something.
So what were you always? Well, I guess my question naturally is, there's this moment that like people kind of get the bug, and I'm curious about that moment for you.
For
Like
photography,
what moment? Yeah, what was it? Was it that high school? Like I'm
I
curious about it.
think when I realized that I wanted to be an artist, but I didn't know how to draw.
Fair enough.
Yeah,
So
probably like around high school is probably when I initially just like was curious about it and got into it. And I think when I started doing the color printing, that's when I like was like, okay, I'm really serious about this.
yeah, that's interesting. So what subjects were you kind of drawn to at that time?
Um, it's like landscapes, kind of I guess in a way similar to what I'm into now, but in a
Yeah.
more rudimentary sense. I was really into like alternative processes and like like using different color chemistries and stuff. I was really into like the color darkroom aspect of photography.
I'm so jealous.
So yeah, it was
I never got to learn it. Yeah.
yeah, it's I really missed that way of working, and it was such a
Yeah.
cool um yeah, opportunity because you could pay like $200 and have a whole semester of unlimited darkroom access.
Wow.
Uh, so yeah, I really miss that way of working and not being on the computer. And also, yeah, just kind of like the communal space of the darkroom was a really great kind of like social setting to really develop as a photographer.
Yeah. Yeah, especially when you're like it's an interesting like kind of community in there. There's a lot of really focused people, and they're like,
Yeah,
hey, will you look at this and see if I'm seeing this right? Because after a while your eyes cross if you don't get a second look at it sometimes. Yeah, that's kind of that's interesting. But you said something that's interesting that I don't hear a lot. A lot of people say I realized I wanted to be a photographer, but you said artist. Were
right.
you always into art, or when did you make that connection?
Um, hmm. Yeah, probably when I was a teenager, probably like shortly before I started taking the photo classes and stuff.
Interesting.
Yeah, probably right around the time I got into high school, I was like,
You saw it as an art.
well, I knew I wanted to do something like creative and related to art. I wasn't like super focused on photography specifically, and that's just
Sure.
sort of where I ended up kind of finding my place. Um, but in general, I guess I yeah, kind of go back and forth between like saying an artist or a photographer.
It's interchangeable. I have both a BFA and an MFA, and I still struggle with that idea. Even though I have a fine art degree, in photography, I have a hard time saying I'm an artist. It's just, I don't know. When you do it professionally, it almost feels different.
Yeah,
Yeah, and there's a interesting line there. It's more like technician.
I feel like yeah, it depends. I think I choose which word to use depending on the context.
Yeah, makes sense.
So I feel like if it's more of like a photo specific thing, I'll probably refer to myself as a photographer. But if it's more like in the realm of contemporary art or something, then yeah, I'll probably label myself as an artist just because it's like a different um
Different muscle,
yeah,
different part of
exactly.
the brain. Yeah, no, 100%.
Well, the way that like those demographics engage with the terms is different, I feel like.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, 100%.
Because like yeah, the photo world is adjacent to the art world, but it's also kind of its own realm.
But it's art is very much buried into industry in so many different regards. So it's just interesting that that photography conversation is such a blurry one for some people. I spent years in theory, so I'm firmly solid in my it's art kind of argument, but it's at first I wasn't sure. But I'm kind of curious a little bit about was your family artistically inclined, or are you kind of the one breakout from it?
Um, Sort of. I mean, like, yeah, my sister was really excellent drawer, but she never ended up pursuing it. Yeah, I guess my family has a really like Soviet background and attitude. My dad's an engineer.
Okay.
Is definitely like a very linear thinker, which maybe is what drew me to like the camera as a sort of mediary between me and like the art. Oh, sorry, my screen just turned off because I haven't moved
Oh,
my.
you're right. It didn't affect anything.
Um, so that's maybe why I got interested into like the camera as like a machine or like a system, I guess. Um, so yeah, I'm kind of the only one in my family that has pursued anything creative.
Just it's kind of like your life. Yeah, it's I'm just curious. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say also that's probably because I'm the youngest out of my family. So I moved here when I was 5, and my sister was like 14 at the time. So I feel like yeah, the opportunities we had were just a little bit different as well.
For sure. I think especially because like I don't hear a dialect on you at all. You sound very um, Midwestern.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no, oh, yeah.
what's that?
I have a more noticeable accent when I speak Russian than when I do.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. That's awesome. Uh, I think it's definitely interesting to kind of dive into those roots. I'm always curious how it comes about for people, especially because going the artistic route or choosing a profession that's in the creative field is it's reserved for the persistent, the people that kind of get drawn into it and obsessed with it. And I'm always curious if that's comes from the family or if that comes from an own individual pursuit or what. And I have found that it's a very small percentage that it's like family oriented, and it's a lot of times um, it's the what do they call that? The black sheep of the family, the the one that's like I'm going to go my own way, kind of,
Yeah,
And I'm always curious about that process and what takes you there. So
yeah. I think it was just a mixture of curiosity and yeah, maybe yeah, kind of this idea of maybe forming an identity in reaction to aspects of your family or something.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Carving your own corner in a way. Yeah, clearing your own space. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's interesting. I'm also, a lot of times, as you kind of get it, you had this opportunity to get into a dark room. You had this amazing access to a color dark room. Some of my older listeners don't realize that some of us younger guys had to struggle with that. We had to find it. Or never got an opportunity, but you did. And so you got that bug. You were developing your own work. How did you perfect your craft? How did you continue going? What were your steps after high school? Did you go immediately into work or did you chase it at school? Talk to me a little bit about that developmental part.
So when I finished high school, I kept on going to the community college that I was taking the photo classes at. But I just started going there full time. So I went there for a couple years, and then I transferred to like a university, Wayne State University, which is the main sort of large university in Detroit. Um, so that's where I finished up my undergrad. Um, yeah, I'd say probably the most formative time was the time spent in the community college darkroom.
That's awesome.
That's kind of I guess why I really learned photography, you could say.
Did you have anybody like come along and take you under
Um,
their wing or have a big influence on you?
yeah. My closest friend at the time, his name is Ryan Dubulski. He's a photographer who's actually worked with Steve as well. Um, yeah, I met him when I was at the community college darkroom, and we became super close friends. And Ryan's a bit older than me, and he just had a broader knowledge of photography at the time, and he introduced me to a lot of stuff that ended up being a really big influence on my work. Like he showed me Dusseldorf School and things like that. He just kind of opened up sort of the world of contemporary photo to me.
So I'm always like, I keep saying this. I'm always curious about kind of that developmental part as well. It's like once you get the bug, then what, right? How did you pursue it, and what kept you going? What subjects were you kind of drawn to? What pulls your eye?
I think when I started photographing, kind of like the type of work that I do now, I was really interested in landscapes, and kind of like, I guess following in the vein of like the new topographics or Dusseldorf School was really how I started out, kind of when I was taking photography seriously. Um, so at the time, I was really interested in like a man altered landscape, I guess.
Mm.
Yeah, I feel like since then I've gotten more into like portraiture and just kind of thinking about that as a landscape of itself.
It's a type of research, the man's influence on land, and then man himself, or man or woman, it's interesting. So I'm curious about, does research play a big role in your work? Do you spend a lot of time in research, or do you kind of allow
Not really.
experiences?
I feel like I've tried to have like a really research heavy approach, especially when I was at grad school. I would I like think about stuff. And yeah, so I feel like I tried to like read a lot of theory and stuff, and it never ended up leading to good work. I think it's like helpful to have that stuff in your mind, but like, yeah, ultimately I guess, yeah, it's hard to like make work from that sort of cognitive headspace. And like, yeah, also when you do research, it's very like language heavy, I guess, or in my mind, like research is like, reading about something. And so you're engaging with like an idea through words and through language instead of like through physically interacting with it, like through the camera. And
Yeah.
like,
I think
unless
that's
you're really
interesting.
translating those two realms, I feel like it doesn't usually lead to great work, at least for me. Because I feel like, yeah, my best work comes from, yeah, kind of more intuitive experiences.
It's I think you bring up an interesting point there. When you some people that I meet, they're very much into kind of researching the history of a place, or kind of going back through and figuring out what was and what's there now. But what's interesting about doing that kind of research, especially if it's literal or literature, is that history is. I heard someone say this once, and it stuck with me. History is his story. If you break out the two words, it's a person's perspective. And when you photograph, you're actually doing it from your perspective and using, images as your language. And so I can see how that can contradict but that's not always common. And so what do you feel like, you're kind of doing your own individual personal research in that regard. So what are you looking for? Why do you think you pick the subjects that you do? Because you have a couple of them that are very distinct, and I don't think it's all, kind of an aesthetic kind of thing. You're actually picking up on subjects that seem to be interesting to you and connecting to people in a real way. So, like, what do you think is drawing you there? What's got your attention? What's got your imagination?
I think each project kind of leads from one to the next, or like, yeah, I'll be working on a project and, there'll be threads that go off into something else, and then becomes a project of its own. So I don't know if I'm ever like I don't sit down and like go out to find a subject. I think there's strands that connect things and lead me from one place to another. Yeah, I think most of my projects have probably been like that, with the exception of the worker stuff, because that was made through a residency.
Gotcha. So you were kind of inspired. That I was curious about that, because it's kind of a it felt separate when I was looking at your work, but it was I could still feel your sensibility in the images, which I really enjoyed. It's there's another thing too, is that the ice fisher. I just can't get this image. You have this one image that stands in my mind of, it's almost like a orange bag that filled with air around the person. I guess it's used as a windbreaker. I don't know, but I just can't get it out of my head. But what drew you there? That's the first body of work that caught my attention, partly to the fact that Steve was like, "Hey, check this out." And I did, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. And I've done a little ice fishing myself. So like, what drew you there? Why?
So yeah, I feel like that's a really good example of sort of one project leading to another, because I was in Kazakhstan photographing for a project that I did with Fabrica in Italy, and it was a book that kind of looked at Central Asia as a whole, and yeah, kind of like how each country has sort of formed its own unique identity. 25 years after the fall of the Soviet Union. Um, and yeah, that was my first time, I guess, working on a big project in Central Asia. And I was in Kazakhstan and I came across the ice fishers and I photographed a handful of them, thinking I would include them in this kind of more broader, larger overview project. But then they didn't end up making the edit. And I realized that like it's really its own project in itself. So I went back and yeah, just spent some time photographing solely the ice fishers.
What was the magic? What what caught your imagination there? What was it about it?
Um, I think the texture was just really interesting to me, like the plastics. Yeah, kind of this like um improvised architecture in a way, and how kind of different each structure varies from the next, and like it's sort of approaching these ice fishers as like a portrait, but not in a traditional sense where it's like you can see the person. Um, yeah, Kathy Opie, who I studied with at UCLA, yeah, she talks about like some of her projects, and she is interested in this idea of like approaching architecture as portraiture. And so, yeah, I guess that's kind of a similar thing that I was interested in with the ice fishers, is sort of looking at these like created structures as a kind of portraiture in and of itself. And I guess, yeah, that sort of ties into the Beckers and the idea of like a typology and stuff.
That's interesting. So you were kind of seeing these, uh, I guess, constructions, and you found a kind of personality in them, almost
Yeah.
a differentiating kind of uh, thing about it. It's you get out there, it's flat and it's ice. But everyone's so creative. When you do ice fishing up in Minnesota, they have these like trailers on skis that yeah. Have you seen the? Yeah. Yeah. Um, so it's interesting. Do you do any ice fishing yourself or no?
No.
No. Yeah. So you were really there for the people. Any interesting stories or anything that's kind of fascinating about it that kind of caught your?
I don't know if anything sticks out about the ice fishers in particular versus like other interactions I've had photographing in Central Asia. Um, I was surprised by just like how long they would be out there for. I mean, they'd be out there for like 8-10 hours at a time,
Yeah.
and it's super cold there. It swaps between being the first and second coldest capital with Ulaanbaatar on varying years. Um, so it gets down to like -40 there.
Wow. Like
Celsius.
Fahrenheit. You're saying Fahrenheit.
They're actually are the same at -40. So it's
Oh, it is?
both. Yeah, it's the crossover point. So
Oh.
yeah, I guess -40 Fahrenheit and Celsius there.
That is ridiculous. That is ridiculously cold. You know what I have found? It seems like, when you spend that much time out on the ice or whatever, it's almost meditative. It's almost more about enjoying a beer with your buddies than it is about, catching anything.
I think the tents are very isolating. Like, it's not like you can hang out in the tent with somebody else.
Yeah, interesting.
Groups of ice fishers that are fishing together, but they're all in their own like separated little worlds.
Wow.
So it's like, yeah, it is a very meditative experience.
Especially that long to do
Yeah.
something like that. You're not really moving.
Yeah.
And so you're kind of sitting out there bearing the wind, and it takes a different kind of motivation.
Yeah.
I think that's really, really interesting. But you've also you had that project too, the auto workers. And I thought that was really quite good. We're going to get a chance to kind of look at all those, and I don't want to jump into too much detail, but are you talking about, when you said Kathy Opie, are you talking about the famous Kathy Opie? Catherine Opie? Yeah, the portraitist. So that was one of your teachers.
Yeah.
How cool is that?
Yeah, she was really great to work with.
Wow.
But yeah, she used to run the photo program at UCLA. So got to work with her when I was there.
Oh wow, that's amazing. It's a small world. A lot of famous photographers are teachers, and so a lot of times you run across them in the collegiate worlds, and so I hear that. I hear names dropped every once in a while. I'm like, is that really? That's awesome. Do you have this is like my final question before we jump into really looking at some work and stuff like that. Do you have any particular photographers that are inspiring to you? Anybody that artist? It doesn't even have to be photographers. It could be literature or painters or whoever. But is there anybody out there that kind of inspires you that really kind of, I don't know, I use the right word there. I think inspire is the word. Yes. Anybody out there?
Yeah, it's hard to think off the top of my head just because there's so many. It's like when somebody asks you what's your favorite movie.
I know mine right away. Yeah,
I never think of stuff. I always am it's hard to pick individual ones or something.
Well, you said you were talking about that one school. Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, when I was getting interested in photography, I think that was a really big sort of influence. Yeah, like Andreas Gursky and the Beckers.
There you
go. Thomas Ruff. I mean, yeah, that whole group of photographers was really interesting to me when I was first picking up the camera. And yeah, actually, I got really into 4x5 stuff through that, and I was doing that for a while. Yeah, I feel like I don't think about them so much now. They're definitely a foundational backbone, I guess.
That's for my audience that wants to go and chase down photographers. Gursky is, it's one of the people that I instantly thought of when looking at your auto worker series. That series. There was this one shot that I was just like, wow, that looks like a Gursky. And so I love that, but there's so many of us, we have our own practice, but sometimes, I'm also a fan, at the same time. There are certain people that I like to see what they're up to, and I'm always curious if anybody else is like that. I often meet a lot of people too. Early on, they have some kind of some photographer that kind of captures their imagination and they get inspired. But then later, they develop their own practice, and so they don't look at anything anymore. I listened to one person; they were like, "I don't look at anybody. I don't have books. I don't watch shows. I'll probably watch my episode, but I won't watch anything else." And I'm like. And because they don't want anything to contaminate the well, you know what I mean? The imagination. Do you feel like that's you in some way?
I'm the complete opposite.
Really?
That well.
You're like, show me something cool. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like everything that everything's always mediated by what you're engaging with externally.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's why it's hard to just think of something on the spot, because I'm always just looking at different stuff.
No, that's true. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've had so many conversations now that I don't know that I would be able to tell you who is influencing me right now.
Uh,
Just because I do follow a lot of contemporary photographers that are really focused on the man-made landscape. The
it,
human intervention in the landscape, and so yeah, I find myself kind of drawn by a lot of those guys. One of them is a UH grad, and I'm forgetting his name right now. I'm probably going to cut this out, but God, he did this great series on mines. It'll come to me later. I guarantee it. I'll drop it right in the middle of one of your projects. I'll be like, yeah, that's him. How about I tell you my favorite movie? I'm just kidding, but all right. So I think we did a really good job, kind of teasing what our audience is going to look at, and so let's go ahead and transition to taking a look at some of your work. I think you're going to share your website with us, and so where are you going to start us?
I think I'll do a brief introduction to that book I was doing on Central Asia because that sort of leads to the ice fishers, and then I'll talk about.
That's great.
So,
Let's do it.
um, okay, so let's first talk about this project that led to ice fishers, which was a project called Formations that I did at Fabrica, which is a residency sort of uh, center. I guess it's not really a residency. It's kind of like in between a residency and a school, I guess. But it was this institution started by Olivero Toscani and Benetton in the 90s. And they invite artists and photographers from all over the world to spend a year there basically working on a project. Um, and they also used to publish Colors magazine, which that's another sort of thing that was really influential to me when I was getting into photography. But anyway, the project that I did there was this book called Formations, which looked at each of the countries that make up post-Soviet Central Asia and how they sort of formed, their own nascent identities 25 years after the fall of the Soviet Union. Um, and it was while I was photographing for this project that I came across the ice fishers. Um, and I photographed a handful of them the first time that I was in Kazakhstan for that, thinking I'd include them in this project. But then, yeah, they didn't end up making the edit for the book, and I sort of just realized that it's kind of its own project in itself. So then
Let's take a look at that book. Let's get in there.
The Formations, or
Yeah. Let's look at a little bit of that. You did a great job. You kidding me there? The architecture. A lot of people don't realize, especially some of my American friends, that the architecture there is unbelievable. like that building in Central Asia, like some of that stuff is just amazing. Like, is that what kind of you were kind of looking at? What was kind of the central thing pulling your eye there?
Yeah, so this image is interesting because it's actually Astana, which is the city where I photographed the ice fishers. And it's kind of similar to Dubai because it was built in the late, kind of the early 90s, right after the fall of the Soviet Union, when Kazakhstan was able to nationalize its oil and hydrocarbon reserves. So yeah, they basically built this new capital super quickly from oil money, and it's supposed to be this like symbol of post-Soviet Kazakhstan and its departure from that past.
Uh,
So the architecture here is pretty atypical for Central Asia, just because it was built completely from scratch in the 90s.
It's really interesting. Can you flip through a few pages, or is it?
So yeah, this is kind of more like typical Soviet. I mean, these are kind of more newer ones, but yeah, there's a lot of these like smaller Soviet era like townhomes.
Yeah. When you were going there, you kind of as you immigrated to the United States when you were 5,
Yeah.
and you going back there, did you feel like you were looking for something? Were you trying to kind of discover this place? What do you think drew you back there?
Um, I think I was interested in the overlapping identities and narratives of Central Asia. Um, Let me think. Because I had traveled there before I worked on this project. So I feel like, yeah, I had kind of a familiarity with it. Um, but yeah, I think what really drew me to take photos there was kind of the overlap of all these different histories that make Central Asia a really unique place. And yeah, I guess this kind of overlapping of categories has been a theme throughout my practice since then, or like kind of the new identities that emerge when different worlds sort of come together. And Central Asia is a prime example of that because it used to be nomadic, and then it was part of the Ottoman Empire, then it was part of the Russian Empire, and now it's in the post-Soviet space. And yeah, so it's got like a long history of Islam in addition to communism being overlaid on top of that history. And now it's just a very kind of globalized space now, where it's really the crossroads between Russia, China, and the Middle East.
I think it's just a fascinating history that we just don't hear a lot of. Why do you think that is? Like, I don't, I guess it's reinventing itself, in the 90s, and like, it's just really interesting.
I think, well, for Americans, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that those countries didn't really exist, as countries until the 90s. So it just
Yeah.
wasn't like on a lot
Yeah.
of people, you know, like frame of reference until then. I think that has partly to do with it. I think it's also just a really difficult place to categorize. And yeah, it's like a really
It's got a long history. Yeah.
yeah.
It's a very long history,
Um, so yeah, but it is interesting because I feel like it is kind of one of the sort of geographic blind spots in a lot of people's mental maps of the world.
Yeah, well, you also had, in particular, that particular country, you had Sacha Baron Cohen, like
Oh yeah, yeah, I feel like that's
the Borat movies, like completely ruin, like any idea.
most people's like idea.
Exactly. So thank you. Like, but like, when there's another photographer that I'm having a hard time remembering his name right now, and it seems to be a problem right now for me. But he focused on these Central Asian countries, and he was looking at some of the architecture and some of these like almost utopian-esque kind of constructions that were kind of laying dormant. No one was there, but it was like it was fascinating to kind of get a view into. Go ahead.
These are Soviet built.
Yes. Well, there was I forget the exact country, but it was Central Asian. It was a old post-Soviet countries that had changed. Like you gave a great history on it. That 90s era where you kind of have these like master plan cities built. Like
Okay.
yeah, I can pull up the name really quick if you want me to. But but it captured my imagination. Partly to the fact is um, uh, these places almost seem almost, you know, the like utopian in a way, like the city of the future, kind of. Yeah. And it was this kind of idea of kind of recrafting a new identity, you know. And so I loved the way the way you put that. But what I really liked about looking through some of those images, you get this interesting contrast between the kind of that overlapping Soviet era as well, you know, where everything was kind of all the same, and you know, it was modest, and everyone kind of had the same kind of um, um, I guess appliances, you know, and houses, and the community was tight and close, and you know what I mean. You've also got a little bit of that in there too, which I think is really interesting too. So
You mean the ubiquity between all
yeah,
these?
yeah. I had another artist on here. She was talking about going back to Russia, and her name is Sasha Rudinsky, and she was actually photographing kind of inside a Russian home. And one of the things that I thought caught my attention was that she said that that everyone kind of found identity in the sameness. Like she goes, I could walk into a Russian living room in those communities and almost feel like I'm at home because it's very similar to where I'm from. You know, that community finds kind of you know, in America, she was talking about, in America we find our identity in our uniqueness, you know, being different and having a different car. But in that community it was different. It was almost reversed, you know. So go ahead, you were going to add something.
Oh no, I just think that's a really interesting way to think about it. And yeah, now that I'm reflecting on it, there is a lot more sort of homogeneity, at least in terms of like material culture, um, in the post-Soviet world.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, especially like just in the spaces or something, like there's a kind of familiarity between all of them. There's actually there's a movie that's it's like a popular movie to watch on New Year's in the post-Soviet world, and it's called The Irony of Fate, and it's about a guy that I forget. I think he just goes to a bar and he gets drunk, and then he goes home, but he goes into somebody else's apartment, and basically throughout the whole movie, he's just kind of going about his like day as his apartment, because like housing was so standardized in the Soviet Union at the time that like there was literally only a handful of apartment layouts that you could possibly live in.
Yeah.
And that's like, yeah, I feel like that's a really
It's kind of playing on that same theme.
yeah.
And I found the photographer. His name is Frank Herford. He calls his work like these. He calls it imperial pomp in
Oh
Russian.
yeah. I was
Yeah,
thinking about. He does a lot of stuff in Russia, which
yeah.
yeah, like Astana and Turkmenistan, or Ashgabat, which is the capital of Turkmenistan, are probably the only two in Central Asia that are have this like super distinct post-Soviet vibe. But there's a lot of architecture in Russia is like very much of that kind of like neoliberal like global kind of style or something.
Interesting. I am just, I think I am just absolutely fascinated. So anybody that's photographing that region, you got my attention, you know, like, and in this building captures that kind of, um, I guess that kind of aesthetic, you know, or that kind of thinking, you know, it's so interesting. But so you were there, you were photographing. That also got you. You met these ice fishers, and that's the project where I think I was introduced to you for the first time. So is that where we're going next, as far as?
Yeah. So yeah, when I was working on that book, I came across these ice fishers in Astana, which they there's a river that bisects the city, and that's where they mostly fish. And yeah, it was super foggy, and yeah, it was just a really visually interesting thing, and I really liked this kind of like discarded material being removed from one context and repurposed in another. So I photographed a handful of them when I was there the first time. This is actually from my first trip there. And I thought I could include them in the Formations project, but uh, yeah, they just didn't end up making the edit. So I went back and I spent about a month, just going out on the ice and photographing these guys.
I think they're
Uh,
like little like plastic pop-up tent. How do you breathe in? Well, and then you have like little storage.
yeah,
How are they getting air in there? Is there like a heater or something?
no, so there isn't a seal. It's kind of like a greenhouse, or like
Ah,
like your air builds up in there, and that's what keeps you warm. Um, and yeah, there isn't like super steady airflow, but they're not sealed at the bottom, so there is circulation.
so you do get some kind of.
But that's where they're puffed up, is because like the heat in the air builds up
Gotcha.
in the.
That's interesting.
Uh,
Almost like a hot air balloon.
yeah, and that's like what.
That's kind of
Yeah,
how it's working. That's
great.
interesting.
But yeah,
So
all
they'll,
this is random materials that are like you know repurposed packaging or things like that.
yeah.
Like this one is hand sewn, and you can like see the seam here.
Were they open to you photographing them?
Yeah, they were cool. They were kind of confused like why I was interested in it. They're like it just seemed super banal to them. And like yeah, I think they were just confused about like why I was interested in the bags in particular.
Oh,
Um, yeah, they were open to it, and I think it's interesting for them to talk to somebody that has grown up in the U.S. but is from Central Asia. So I feel like we usually end up talking about uh, kind of cross cultural differences and things like that.
yeah. That's interesting. Did you find that most people were kind of using these kind of constructed plastic tent like handmade kind of things? Was that like a common trend, or was it just this particular group that you were with?
Um, no, I that's a pretty. It's just like a common practice in a lot of kind of places where people ice fish in Central Asia.
That's interesting.
Just because like it's practical and cheap.
Makes sense. It's a good idea.
Yeah,
Because the main thing you need is something to break that wind. You don't want to be getting blasted,
yeah,
and you got to keep that water off you so you can stay warm, like snow and stuff. And yeah, that's really really quite interesting.
yeah.
And yeah, wow,
It's also super windy there because Astana was built in the steppe. It was really built like in the middle of nowhere in Kazakhstan. So the winds there, in addition to being super cold, the winds there are also really heavy, just because it's so flat around there.
how long could you stay out photographing at a time?
Um,
You're out there in the elements. You're not.
yeah,
You got it.
the first year I had some issues with my camera battery.
Yeah.
I could like a couple hours at a time, maybe.
Yeah.
Um, but then I went back the next year with a different camera, and I mean, I try to stay out with them for much as I could. Maybe probably the longest was maybe like 6 hours or something.
Oh wow. You went for the duration.
Oh
Did you
yeah.
ever go did you ever like set up one yourself?
I didn't. I did go inside one, but yeah, I didn't set one up for myself.
Interesting. So let me ask you a question. So like, are you a fisherman yourself? Do you fish at all?
No, yeah, like I'm not. I was never really interested in like the fishing aspect of this per se, um, or like that's what they're doing. But yeah, I'm really more interested in like the packaging and sort of viewing these as
Almost little alien pods, you know?
yeah, kind of like a study. Like
It that gives me ET phone home vibes, you know? Like
oh yeah,
you actually like reaching through.
yeah.
Yeah. That's yeah. Well, was there like when you were doing this project, other than like was there anything that surprised you?
Um,
Any revelations?
I
Anything that
think the
kind of
variations of like bags and how many different ways there were to structure them. Like this one you can see has a seal on the um, seam where it was sewn together. Um, so just like yeah, these like little tricks for like insulation and stuff like that, I thought were super interesting.
so you were really fascinated by the ingenuity of it all,
Yeah, and like the
the
materiality
creativity.
of it and the yeah, like this sort of improvisational structure that is also like very temporary, you know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It kind of gives me morgue vibes.
Morgue, yeah, yeah, I
Yeah.
have kind of that.
Do you know what I mean? Like these people are being like bagged up and they're being stored. You know,
Yeah.
like oh, that's creepy. Yeah. Wow.
Has it like the tighter crops on the they're kind of more like portraits. Yeah. Yeah, like
Yeah.
these.
Yeah. Yeah. A little bit. What's the reception like when people look at these and what kind of?
I feel like this has been probably my most successful project. I think I got really lucky with it and it just kind of like checks off a lot of marks because it's like really graphic and like people can just kind of engage with it automatically, but then it has this kind of more, unique story underneath it. Um, so out of all my projects, I feel like this is the one that gets the most engagement. And yeah, I think people are probably interested in sort of this similar things that I'm drawn to in the images, which is like the variance in like how each structure is formed and things like that, and just sort of like yeah, the texture of the plastic I think is really intimate in a lot of ways because it's very like skin like. So I think when it's photographed, it kind of has an interesting read.
Yeah, plastic is kind of a strange material. It's a relatively new invention, and
Yeah,
the way we use it is it's almost foreign, and it's interesting that you're kind of capturing in that regard. You know,
yeah,
I uh, fishing is something that my family does a lot of, and they they're I'm not really a big fisherman myself.
mhm.
But I love going out there with them. I always take photos. That's the thing that I try to capture. I don't try to capture fish. I don't try to catch the fish. I let them do that. But
Uh,
did you kind of feel any kind of um, uh, did you get any kind of vibe for why they were doing what they were doing? Why they were drawn to this as a hobby? Was there kind of was it out of need, necessity, leisure, get out of the house? You know, what do you think was drawing them?
I think it's a
People?
mixture of stuff. I mean, some people like sell the fish on a market. Um, Majority of people probably just do it for a hobby. I'd say. Um, I think it's really the meditative aspect of it that probably is the draw. It's really you just kind of go into like another realm, especially when you're in this bag that you're sort of isolated from the world in, and then when the outside is also kind of isolating with the fog and stuff like that, it's just a really meditative experience. And I think that is the draw for a lot of these guys.
That's interesting. Do you relate to that at all?
Yeah, I think so. I think I'm kind of, can kind of be a bit of a loner, I guess. So yeah, I can relate to this kind of idea of wanting to be in your own sort of world like that.
Yeah. It's it's a lot of people say photography is kind of that kind of exercise. It's kind of a single person sport. It's very meditative. When I think it is, so it's especially when you're out in the world versus studio stuff, which is like there's a lot of people involved, but but this kind of where you're out there kind of trying to understand the world around you, it's very meditative. Surrounding yourself in plastic and putting your spot in the ice, but in kind of a way you are a little bit. So
yeah, I think when we were talking about research and I was talking about the difficulty that I have with like trying to front load research or something before a project, I think, it's like what you're saying, like as a photographer, you kind of go out and have a meditative experience through the kind of lens of the camera in a way,
How long did you photograph these?
So first time I went there, I was there for a couple weeks, but I was also photographing a lot of other stuff. And then I went back for a month the following year.
Did you already have the contacts? You were like, hey, I'm coming with you.
I had a friend that lived in Astana, which is who I stayed with. I got the number of one of the guys I photographed that I ended up rephotographing this time, but these guys are always out there, so it wasn't.
There's ice. It's time to fish. Yeah. It's there's a persistence about it for sure. I just can't imagine being in that kind of cold, for that long.
The bags do surprisingly keep in quite a bit of heat in there, at least enough to take the edge off.
Yeah. Well, it definitely will keep the wind from cutting in, but when it's pressing up against you like that, though, you would think that cold kind of can bite a little bit. I don't know. It must have some strong vodka. I don't know.
A lot of these guys are drunk. It's meditative experience.
Yeah. that is one of the things that I enjoy. And don't get me wrong, I like to go out there and have a beer with my family. You know what I mean? That's why I like to go, but I don't care too much for the fishing. So but it's fun to kind of see the creativity. Like my brother is annoyingly good at fishing, annoyingly good. And when I actually was trying, he was always catching the big fish. I don't know how these people do it, but he's so creative. He's so he's got that brain for it. What's that?
Like he approaches fishing in a creative way.
Well, the way the baiting, the tying of the hooks, the type of equipment that is used, they call them anglers for a reason. They know the kind of angles that you have to play. There's definitely a type of engagement with the environment around you that takes a level of creativity. And I'm not surprised there is these creative structures with plastic and these people that are actually out there using interesting materials in order to kind of engage in that activity, so it's definitely interesting. But I think it comes there's there's that, I think, that need to kind of go and be in nature away from the noise, and I think that definitely captures that. I think it's really, really interesting. When you did you get to go? Did you get to go to the opening of when is I wasn't sure when he introduced your work to me. I didn't know if he was in preparation for a group show, or if it's already up.
It's opening, I think, February 7th.
That's what it was in preparation. Yeah. Okay.
But no, unfortunately, I can't make it out.
What?
To that. Yeah, it's yeah. They said they usually try to fly out artists for it, but they're usually from Europe. LA to Treviso is a long way.
It is a long way. Yeah, you're puzzled looking at. What's that?
Otherwise, yeah, I would have loved to go there.
Yeah, there's a if you can get to New York, there's a good cheap flight from LA to Paris, and then a good cheap flight from Paris to Treviso. That's actually pretty easy. Maybe I can give you those details if you're interested. But yeah. But what I was going to say is have you gotten a chance to look at the other artists that are in that same show?
Yeah, I wasn't familiar with David Chancellor before, but his work is really cool. I've never seen, like, his approach to photographing wildlife is super interesting.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, I've never really seen like wildlife photography approached from that kind of aesthetic mindset, I guess.
He's amazing.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised he's working at National Geographic or working with them.
Yeah, that definitely seems like a good fit for it.
Yeah. Well, he's telling stories, He's like, it's like this the photography is as an extension of a story or something that he's trying to kind of express. And I love how Steve kind of brought your work and his work into conversation. There's another photographer that's also involved in that show, and I'm always curious sometimes when you get to be a part of a group show like that I'm always curious about the other photographers, how they feel like their work kind of interplays between the other ones. Have you gotten a chance to think about that at all? Or
yeah, it's interesting because, like, yeah, I guess when I was working on this project, like, the actual fishing aspect of it wasn't super interesting to me. It was really like the structures and their materiality and sort of like approaching them as these like ambiguous portraits. So yeah, when I see the project in the context of like agriculture, or yeah, kind of looking at like the relationship between humans and animals, which I feel like, yeah, it's been kind of put in those contexts a few times before. It's always interesting to me because it's like something I wasn't I wasn't really envisioning the project to be talking about that per se. So it's cool to see, like, yeah, the different ways that it kind of connects to sort of different elements beyond what I maybe was consciously thinking of when I was photographing them.
Yeah. You were drawn to the creativity of these man-made like pods.
Yeah. Also, like, yeah, like the synthetic
yes
thing,
Yeah, the plastic nature of it all. It kind of reminds me of now that I live in Europe, I don't see plastic bags anymore. I just don't see them. They just don't exist. You get these recycled plastic ones, but they're like reusable and heavier or whatever. But when I look at these, I kind of think of a Walmart or a Target bag, like they've just wrapped themselves in, and they're using it in these interesting ways. But when I was growing up, we also used those bags in so many different ways. We got so creative in how we use those, to becoming trash bags again, or holding these gadgets, or like we would rip them apart to make a fort as a kid, like a window or something, like and it kind of captured that kind of, when you were talking about it, that kind of reuse and repurpose, and but they're using it for a very interesting. What kind of plastic was it? Was it just like shipping container bags? What?
Yeah, it was like shipping bags. So it's mostly like,
Heavy, right?
yeah, it's like packaging from like stuff that's like imported. I feel like,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
it's
like heavy materials. It's not a
yeah,
it's not a
which
Walmart bag.
yeah,
There'd be no way it would last. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
so that was interesting to me as well because like ice fishing is this historically nomadic kind of practice in
Very.
Kazakhstan, um,
Yeah.
and it's being overlaid or like overlapped with these materials that are being brought in from other parts of the world and are really like the material detritus of global trade kind of. So it's kind of this like intersection between these two really overlapping things that I thought was interesting.
Yeah, our obsession with plastic
Yeah.
as a human species. Yeah. Yeah, I totally get that. I was saying it earlier. It's this relatively new invention, but it is propagated throughout the entire world, and it's found its way into almost everything that we do. I've said this joke before. That's like we have these microplastics, in our water and our food and all these other things, and I have a feeling that they're gonna kind of, future humans are gonna like dig us up, and they're gonna think we were part plastic or something. It's gonna be a part of our DNA or something. You know what I mean? And like I don't know. I think about this, that long time, like thinking about our place in the strata. What are they going to dig up and find? They're going to find plastic coins. I don't know. Like,
It's
it's
just part of like everyone's like DNA now, kind of.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And now it's like it's even in these kinds of activities, I think it's super creative, and like like I think about the ice fishing that I was doing. That was way high end. You have these like ice houses that literally slide out there. They're little like trailers that people put behind their cars, and they just slide them out. But this is another level. This is a dedication and a creativity that I really, really appreciate. I love the way you photographed it too. So,
Thank
you were working with Fabrica, and you were in this particular series. Kind of you were inspired by Central Asia, and you found your way, with this great group of ice fishers. But you also had another project that I really enjoyed on there called Auto. And it was funny. I think we were talking about it. I want to put those two words together, auto worker. But they're two separate projects. So you have this auto series. So talk to me a little bit about that, where that came from, and maybe we'll have enough time to jump into that worker series as well. But talk to me about auto a little bit.
Yeah, so it's a project I started working on when I was at grad school. I moved to LA in 2017 to go to grad school out here. And I had a really hard time like thinking of what to photograph when I first got here because LA is just such a big place. And yeah, I feel like I was also like struggling to find something I related to or something.
I relate to
And
that completely. 100%. When I came to Paris, it was really, really hard for me to photograph. Yeah.
it's
So
like
everything's new. You're like, what am I interested in? Everything? That's not a project. So no, continue.
yeah, it's hard to like have a unique take on something when you don't have any connections. But yeah, so I was struggling with that, and I thought maybe I should go back to Central Asia to do a project. But yeah, I also like didn't want to only be limited to making work in or about Central Asia. So I was kind of, yeah, in this point where I didn't really like understand if I wanted to be photographing in LA or in Central Asia, or like where my um sort of geographic focus is. And then
Yeah,
yeah, I started
that's
sort of thinking about my background and how it's sort of this, overlap between my experience of being from Central Asia and then growing up in Detroit. And yeah, I thought, like, what if I approached making a documentary project that looks at a space that kind of connects these two places. We're looking at it like where like a sort of geographic world exists in the context of the project or something. So that's sort of how I got interested in the auto shop stuff. Because when I moved with my family to the U.S. in the late '90s, my dad's background, he was a physics professor and an engineer, but his degree wasn't recognized in the U.S. So he worked at an auto collision shop in Detroit for most of my time growing up, and that's a really common um, sort of career pipeline for migrant work from the former Soviet world, particularly for men. Um, and yeah, sort of this like economy that ties in these two really geographically separate places. Um, and so yeah, I had always kind of been interested in that, and when I started thinking about it through this lens is kind of when I really started to think that there could be a project out of this. Um, but
that's an interesting connection. I didn't. Now it's starting to make a lot more sense. Go on. Take it. Let's take us through it.
and yeah, there's also, in addition to it being sort of this, you know, space that is connected through migrant labor, there's also a big economy between the United States and different post-Soviet countries where cars that are totaled here in the U.S. and are deemed too expensive to repair, um, they're auctioned off, and a lot of them are sent to countries in Central Asia where they're rebuilt because the cost of labor there is much cheaper. Uh, so it's kind of like, yeah, recontextualizing this object that was placed, discarded from one economy and placing it into another. Um, which is kind of, yeah, I guess how the work ties in or sort of threads into the ice fisher stuff, because
Yeah.
it's, yeah, this idea of like secondary economies. So yeah, these are all auto shops that I shot between different cities in the US with large post-Soviet populations, and it's all, you know, shops that are run or, mostly employ people that have immigrated from that part of the world, or auto shops in Central Asia and the Caucasus. And yeah, so it's sort of like looking at the auto shop as this transnational space that is not geographically specific, but ties in these really uh, disparate sort of places.
Were you able to? Was it easy to kind of find those groups? Those you said it's a Russian kind of group.
You mean in the U.S.?
Yeah, well, in LA.
Um, yeah. Well, in LA, there's actually a really large Armenian population. It's the
Okay.
largest population of Armenians outside of Armenia.
Kardashian.
Yeah, there's a really large post-Soviet population here. And yeah, no, it's really not too difficult to like actually find
Gotcha.
space to photograph.
As you was this the main project that carried you through your masters?
Um, sort of. I feel like I didn't really make too much work my first year there, and I started working on this my second year at grad school,
Yeah.
and yeah, really probably what I focused on my time there. But this is also still a project I'm working on. Um, so I'm trying to get more images of stuff in the U.S. for it.
Wow. There's I had another guest on here that was looking at the junkyards, the car
Uh-huh.
junkyards that people have, and they basically part out old wrecked cars and stuff like that.
Hello.
Yeah, I'm still here. Did you hear me?
No, I think it cut off after you said junkyards.
It's okay. So I had another guest on my show. His name is Jamie Permuth, and or Jaime Permuth, and he was photographing this one place. I think it's called Willets Point in New York. It doesn't exist there anymore, but it was very, very famous. What's that?
By the baseball stadium, right?
Yeah. Well, it now is completely bulldozed over, but before it was basically an auto junkyard, and so it was like a place where people would, old wrecked cars or whatever, people would go and pull parts off for repairs. And so like, it's kind of interesting in that regard. As far as that place, that community is what kind of caught his attention, and those, the people there. And so I'm using that as context for really a question really is, when you're kind of photographing these, what I'm kind of curious, like, about that kind of community. Is there something unique that was interesting to you, or something that wasn't? Maybe I'm curious about some of your discoveries as you make this project.
Yeah, I guess kind of like the thing that we were talking about with Sasha Rudensky earlier and her experience of going inside a home in Russia and feeling an instant sense of familiarity. I think in a way these auto shops kind of provided me with that.
Really?
Yeah. Because it's such sort of yeah, you can go into one in Kyrgyzstan or you could go into one in Detroit, and it's really the cultural vibe and stuff is the same in both of them. And I think that's what really sort of drew me to these spaces, is sort of the ubiquity between them, despite them being very different places.
That's interesting. Are you a car person at all?
Yeah, I do like cars. Yeah, I'm more of a motorcycle person because it's just a little bit more manageable to do as a hobby.
I dig that.
Working.
Yeah. I like that. Yeah.
But yeah, I'm really into like mechanics and engines and stuff.
Yeah. You weren't into the fishing, so I was curious if you were kind of into.
With this,
You're into it. Yeah. I'm curious about the connection to your father in this. Do you feel like in some ways there's kind of a connection there?
Yeah, I'm sure there is. I think it's difficult to think about what that is consciously.
Yeah. Yeah, there's something there. I'm kind of Jungian, I guess, in this regard. The shadow self. I don't.
Yeah. No, I mean, maybe it's a way to like feel closer to my dad or something.
Maybe.
But yeah, he was on. I mean, like, in a way, the project is completely dependent on my relationship to my dad because it's how it started.
Yeah. It's interesting. Maybe it's a way of kind of exploring your own roots.
No. Yeah, I think it is, and sort of yeah, I grew up as a Central Asian immigrant in Detroit. So this project kind of is in a way the culmination of those, overlapping worlds.
Motor City.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a big fan of I love cars. I like working on them. I like the fact that I can work on them. There's something empowering about it.
Uh,
You know,
you can.
what's that?
I said you can for now.
Yeah.
So
I don't have a car now, and I kind of enjoy it. Like, I don't have to worry about it. What do you mean it can for now? You mean when they go full electric, or
I feel like cars are just becoming more and more difficult
they're
to,
just computers? Yeah.
and it's like, yeah, even like a newer car that has a gas engine, um, yeah, it's still basically like a computer.
Yeah, yeah. You almost have to know a little bit about um, computer hardware as
Yeah.
well. Yeah, and some of the programming that goes into it for the particular models.
Yeah, and
Um,
there's just like intertwined electrical systems and like yeah, when stuff goes wrong, it's like you gotta chase down like the issue within the system and stuff.
one of the things that I got into also as well, which is funny that you're saying that. God, I love that you said that. You can for now, I think that's genius because, like, once we move to electrical motors, you're going to have a completely different game there. Um, you're not talking about a piston anymore. Uh, I work on old cameras like those Carl Zeiss Compor lenses, and I like to really work on them, and they're just very mechanical, and you can pull them apart, clean them up, put them back together, and they work again, and
Yeah.
you'll probably get another 10, 15 years out of it. I feel like that about old cars. You kind of have that kind of ability. I can't do that with this Canon right here. I just even thinking about pulling that thing apart, I'd be like, did I not ground something properly? Is my battery I don't know. Like, it's just another thing. Do you feel like these places are almost they're on their way out? They're gonna. What's your feeling
Honestly,
about it? Yeah.
no, I mean I think they'll probably transition to whatever comes down the pipeline.
You think so? Of
Yeah, I mean yeah, I mean there's a whole economy centered around it. I don't think it's gonna
course.
happen anytime soon. I don't think it'll happen in our lifetimes, but eventually, stuff will probably be fully electrified.
Is there a conversation? Do you think they talk about it?
Probably not so much because that's still like a really abstract
Kind of idea, huh?
concept for the future.
Mm.
And yeah, I feel like, yeah, unless it's like a more kind of newer specialized shop, probably not too much on the
Mm.
radar.
It makes me wonder if my brother is really talented um, in the bays there, or in the shop. He's really good at working at cars. But we have those conversations because I'm a nerd, and I'm like, I love cars, and I love the future of things and the evolution of things. I'm always asking about it. But I was always curious if those um, my brother used to call them gearheads. I was curious if they were ever talking about it, or if they were resisting. You know what I mean? No, like, let's keep it. I just didn't even know if it's still even a conversation. But yeah, it's I really think in a lot of ways, when I look at this project, you're calling up a whole community. This is a whole lifestyle, a whole industry. I like how you're connecting it to the post-Soviet diaspora, and I think that's really, really interesting. And this is so central to so many immigrant communities, believe it or not. So, like, but it's also connected to something else. You're talking about this plastic world that we're in, but like the secondary market, this fix it and keep it going kind of thing that almost seems to be disappearing in this world of Amazon deliveries, you know? It, like the commodifying of things, you know, like just buy another one if it breaks, kind of.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the economy, this sort of economy of salvage cars, really speaks to that because, yeah, like there's a much larger incentive to repair these cars in Central Asia than there is in the West because it's just cheaper to get rid of the old one and replace it.
Hmm.
So I feel like that stuff still does exist, but in like more peripheral economies. Yeah, like that stuff just gets like pushed out to the peripheries pretty much.
Do you think that's what's capturing your attention here?
Um, it's recontextualized in another economy
Yeah.
and like different value and meaning assigned to it. And yeah, I think that's definitely what I'm interested in this, and I think in the ice fisher stuff as well is yeah, like these kind of economies that are on the peripheries and the way that those spaces are connected to larger economies like the one in the United States through this means of exchange.
Hmm. How do you see that? Because I think we have a few more minutes left. I think about 10 more minutes to look at workers. How do you see that connecting to this series? We can take a look at that next if you want.
Sorry, you mean how do I see workers? That one is interesting because I did it through a residency.
Yeah.
And so it's not a subject that I probably would have had the opportunity to photograph were it not for this residency. But when I graduated from UCLA, I applied for an art residency that was run by this construction company out of Washington, D.C. called Clark. And they started a residency where they would hire a recent photography grad to spend a year going around the U.S. and taking photos of all their projects and making kind of a body of work around it. So I started doing that, and that was shortly before COVID. So then COVID happened, and they extended my contract for a bit. It was only supposed to go on for a year. But then, yeah, COVID extended it, and then COVID ended up going longer, and then I had just been there for a while. So it ended up being basically turned into a job for 5.5 years where I would travel around the US and photograph their construction projects. And it was pretty self-directed. So it was a really cool experience. I feel like thematically it's a bit different than my other work because I didn't have the same kind of like personal construction or the same personal relationship to the construction industry when I started photographing it. But I think the theme of like, relating to people through work is something that is present in all my other projects. Um, so yeah, that's probably a connection between kind of these more personal projects that I did in this. Um, yeah, and I've always been like sort of interested in thinking about different ways to approach portraiture. And with this, yeah, I was thinking about kind of playing with these different layers of like anonymity and revealing within a portrait. So there's like images like this one where it's just sort of this kind of like almost index of a worker or like a symbol, and then kind of like playing with these more intimate um, images of people. And yeah, so that like interplay between distance and anonymity and intimacy is I guess was really what I was interested in with this.
Mm. I think you do a really interesting. It seems like you're playing with shape a lot. Like I like the repetitive. You're almost. Let's go back to that side by side where you were doing the building and it was cut out and you were seeing the layers.
This one?
No, go back. Keep going. That one. It's like you're photographing two different levels, but you nailed the exact angle. Well done. That's hard to do. I'm seeing vision.
I think I lined it up like with the crop in Photoshop, maybe.
Yeah, but you did a good job with it.
Thanks.
Yeah. No, but I like the repetition there, though.
Yeah,
But
that's been like a theme when we were working on designing the book, because I partnered with Loose Joints on this, which they're the publisher that published Ice Fishers. And yeah, we were thinking about this like idea of repetition throughout the book because construction itself is very much about repetition. It's kind of like wearing the same floor over and over until you eventually get to where you're going. So there's a lot of like kind of repeating images throughout the project. Yeah, like this is a good example with these kind of like mechanical motions between them. And yeah, so that was a really like that was an idea that kind of came about in the design process, and then was kind of more expanded in the editing.
When you're doing a project like this, is how do you? It can get really repetitive really quickly. So what was your like strategy to kind of? I'm sure you have thousands of images. 5.5 years. How did you?
Oh yeah.
How did you keep it fresh? How are you?
I think, well, a lot of the stuff that I was photographing was people.
Yeah.
So, I'd meet different people all the time, and I feel like that kept it kind of fresh. Also, construction is just such a vast kind of world with so many different types of construction that it can be kind of difficult to fully exhaust, and it's also always changing. That being said, 5.5 years of photographing construction was definitely a lot.
Yeah.
Stuff like, yeah, I could keep thinking new ways to engage with.
Yeah. Was there, you spending that much time? I always like this. It's probably one of my favorite questions. What did you discover that was interesting to you?
I really enjoyed working in construction. It's a super like great social environment, I feel like, at least out in the field. Um, yeah, it just feels really good to be like part of a temporary community like that. Like when you work on a job site, you might be there for, depending on what you're doing, could be there for a year, you could be there for like 3 years, but in any case, you're coming there for a sort of temporary amount of time, and if this sort of community forms around it, which I thought was really cool.
Is it like also? I'm also curious too. There seems to be a rivalry between like contractors and architects. Is that true? It seems like to be a constant tension.
I feel like most of the really experimental architecture projects, like they'll have an architect and then they'll have an architect of record, which like the architect is the one that puts together the concept kind of, and then the architect of record is the one that's like responsible for translating that to a more like feasible thing. So I feel like I never really experienced too much or like seen too much of that because I feel
that
like,
interaction. Yeah.
there's
a yeah. I'm always curious about that. I didn't know if it was just like an age old problem, the visionary with the guy that lays the brick, he's like, nah, I can't do that.
it's also, but like there's also so many levels of it that by
Yeah.
the time
It's a big company you're working with.
or something, it's
Yeah.
already like
Vetted out.
yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I'm
Yeah, there's always like stuff. It's a really dynamic sort of thing because like the job site changes constantly,
yeah.
and like things don't go as planned, and it's a lot of like reacting to dynamic situations.
Yeah. So as far as you said, there was interesting. You said it was the community and stuff like that, and yeah, that was definitely interesting to you. And um, I'm kind of curious. Do you feel like this is something that you would engage with more? Or do you feel like that was? Are you still working there?
No, so I stopped at the end of this past year.
Oh, okay.
Doing fully freelance stuff now.
So do you feel like this is something you would continue to do, or do you feel like uh, it's a subject that you want to continue to research and continue to explore with your camera, or do you feel like you want to kind of chase some other birds?
Maybe not construction specifically. Like I'm more interested in the unique social spaces
Yeah,
that the environments of industry create.
I hear that
So
in you.
yeah, that's really probably more my main focus than construction in particular.
Yeah,
And yeah, that's what I'm doing with the auto stuff. I'm still
yeah,
working on that project. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm focusing on with my personal work for now. Um, and then I'm trying to put together a grant for a project that looks at climate change in Kyrgyzstan, and particularly its effect on glaciers and nomadic herding,
Hmm.
because Kyrgyzstan is one of the lowest contributors to CO2 emissions, but it's going to be one of the countries that's most heavily affected, um, because most of its landscape is mountainous and
Hmm.
it's like made up of glaciers. Um, and those glaciers are really important to have like a seasonal rhythm to them because they provide water for all the life that's around there. So yeah, that's kind of further down the pipeline what I'm thinking about.
Wow. I do see I do see a connection um, between this and the auto. I definitely see it. And as far as aesthetically the way you use your camera, but also the way you talk about those communities. Is do you find what do you find that's common between kind of your own personal research and the auto series versus this one? You're exploring kind of that post-Russian diaspora, and so do you see any commonalities in this one?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a very similar relationship with like migrant work and construction, and that like, I mean, not as much with the post-Soviet diaspora, but obviously there's a huge workforce from Latin and Central America. So there's definitely like that same relationship between geography and like a certain form of migrant labor. Um, yeah, and I guess also the way that like work creates these like really unique social spaces
Hmm.
where people from like a lot of different backgrounds overlap with each other.
Yeah. It's I loved working in those environments. I did a little construction and stuff like that. It was small stuff. It wasn't these large buildings, these massive projects. It was
Yeah,
just small stuff, but the community is it's very you get people from around the world,
yeah,
and they offer their skills in so many different ways, and it's really interesting. Um it's really tight community. You learn to trust another person, Uh,
Yeah, it reminds me, interestingly, of my experience of when I was at the community college, to use the communal darkroom.
Mhm.
It's like, yeah, it's a very similar vibe to community college, where it's like a really disparate group of people that are all like in the same space doing a similar thing, and it's just
Yeah.
kind of like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's really like unique opportunity to connect with people that maybe you otherwise wouldn't.
Yeah. The other thing is the stories that you hear from people.
Mm.
The kinds of stories that you hear about people's struggles in their life and stuff like that. It's a very repetitive job when you're dropping nails into a drywall.
Yeah,
The conversation and stuff, the things you listen to on the radio that spark conversation. It's like um, it's definitely interesting. It's
yeah. It was also an interesting world to jump into after being in grad school and spending most of my time being a part of, I guess, LA's contemporary art community, which is it's a lot less heterogeneous.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I would agree with you.
So it was, yeah, that was a really good experience to have
Yeah,
after.
what talk about a different whoop, yeah, flipped over on its head. Yeah. Yeah, there's a there's something about it. There's a level of trust between people there. There's a it's and I don't know if it comes from just being comfortable in your craft, being good at what you do,
Uh-huh.
and that makes you comfortable, But
Yeah,
it's a really interesting it's a really interesting community. I think there's something also very empowering about being able to do something at a very high level,
yeah,
um, and then getting paid for it. And so there's a confidence that comes about it that is really really interesting. I see it also in an auto mechanic shop, but you also see it on a construction site. And I think it's really interesting too. You know, I think you should explore that connection to your father. I think there's something there. There's
yeah.
something there.
It's interesting because when I was in grad school, I took we had to take these like group critique classes once a year,
Yeah.
where yeah, you would just sign up for, like, there'd be a class, and every week there'd be like a group crit on somebody's work. Um, and I took one that was led by Andrea Frazier, who is a performance artist that was really big in kind of institutional critique, and having these like very self-reflexive approaches to art. But she was also really into psychoanalysis and group relations. And yeah, the structure of her crits was sort of through the lens of group relations, and looking at the ways that people engage with art interpersonally as like a group.
Mhm.
Um, but anyway, so we had to sort of like write this synopsis of our crit, and how we reacted to it and stuff. And I remember her saying, like, in one of her responses to what I wrote, she was saying, I'm trying to think, how did she phrase it? She was like, "I find it interesting that you don't think your audience resonated with like the social themes of your work. I did sense a feeling of lost father figures amongst them, though," which I thought was just like, yeah, like a an interesting way to think about that work.
Lost father figures. I don't get that.
I,
But
I not like, the discussion wasn't about the work in this class. It was really like about the group's reaction to the work.
gotcha.
Um,
Oh, okay. So
like, the work was about that, but that is the
interesting.
the
That's interesting.
reaction to the work.
This is the kind of stuff I like. I like that. I like the psychology and stuff. Yeah.
So that you should look into her work.
If you watch a few of my episodes, you'll notice that I do that. I see the connections, and a lot of it is, as a photographer, we're photographing the world around us. We're trying to make sense of it, but yet
Yeah,
we're doing it from our perspective, you know.
yeah,
And so much of our perspective comes from our upbringing, our environment, where we came from, and the stories that we tell ourselves, and the stories that we are attracted to, and so so much of it is connected, and some people can't even see their own personal connections, and
yeah,
uh and so I think there is something about it, but I don't know. I think in some ways that if she's looking at it from an audience receptiveness, and this idea of the lost father figure, that's interesting.
yeah, yeah. No, I thought that was an interesting take, but
That is
probably,
really interesting.
um, yeah, like we were saying earlier, there's definitely a relationship to my father because that's my point of access through the project.
Yeah.
Um,
Did you
and so
did you did you know the people that he worked with?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Did you ever go to work with him?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It was pretty like small community. I feel like.
So you got to know kind of the space, the workspace. What's also interesting is like my father also worked in um, he worked in electricity delivery, and so he was a lineman. So he was always was going out in the storms, putting the power lines back up. Very dangerous job. But they knew a kind of piece of my father that I didn't know, and the way they would talk to him was really, really fascinating. And they all had relationships with him that I didn't ever have. And I always thought that was quite fascinating to kind of watch other people interact with my dad. They had stories about him that I had no idea. They knew more about him sometimes than I did. You
Uh,
know, because he spent so much of his life there. And
yeah,
so I think there's something to it. Anyway,
yeah. No, I think yeah, it's interesting. We got many different identities, and we're definitely one person at work, and then we're somebody else outside of that
yeah.
job. You know.
But to see it from a child's perspective versus an adult perspective, I think you're getting that chance through that project.
Yeah.
Getting to kind of
It's a way to think about it.
yeah. Well, you think about it. When you read a book when you're young, and then you read it 10 years later, you see something completely different.
Yeah.
If I read Lord of the Rings when I was young, and then I read it as an adult, and I was like, "Whoa, this thing is amazing!" I missed that. It's just a different thing. Wow, what a conversation! I love seeing your work today. I don't think we have too much time to go any further, so we'll go ahead and stop. I just have one more question for you. So I ask one question to everyone, and it's kind of a two-parter, and you can kind of pick which one you would do yourself, because some people don't like to give advice, and
Uh,
so I always ask if you have any advice for photographers out there, people that want to be image makers. And some people are like, oh, I don't like doing that. And so I give a second one, so you can pick which one. The second question is what would you tell your younger self if you could? And so I'll let you pick. I'll let you pick. So
so I can do both.
I'm going to do.
Um, yeah. Let's see. In terms of advice, I would say that it's really important to build social connections and like intimate relationships in the photo world, because I feel like those are really like what end up forming the boundaries of your photographic world. So yeah, it's really good to have like people to talk about photography with and just have like a network of people that you relate to. So that would probably be my advice.
It's a good one.
Yeah, if I could tell something to my younger self, it'd probably be to chill out a bit, maybe. um,
Yeah.
I feel like there's like a lot of time where I feel like I was trying really hard to make work in a particular way that didn't feel natural or intuitive. And that has always led to really bad work.
Yeah.
And like, for instance, I was saying the ice fisher stuff has probably been my most like well received project, and that was just, you know, totally not premeditated and just something I sort of encountered in the world
Yeah.
that I was drawn to. And I think that yeah, that's like a totally valid way to go about making work, and for me at least has led to much better work than like trying to tell myself that the work needs to be something, or that it you know, needs to be more research heavy or things like that.
Yeah, you got to do it your way. You know, that's something that I was I have noticed a lot with people is that like it's you could say the very practice of, you know, allowing photography to be your guide through the world, it's going to lead you somewhere. You just have to be
Yeah,
open to where it leads you. And in throughout that journey of being a photographer, you're going to get good at it. You do it something enough, you know what I mean? You're going to get good at it. And
yeah,
you just have to allow yourself to go through the process. And I love it. Just chill out. We're going to put that on
yeah.
a t-shirt. Yeah. Chill out, Motor City. I'm just kidding. I don't know. But thank you so much for coming on. It was a great conversation. How can people connect with you?
They could go on my website, aleksey.kondratyev.com, or I'm on Instagram at Aleksey.Kondratyev.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much again for coming on. It was amazing.
Well, thanks again.
I honestly felt like I was exploring a part of my childhood through it. So that's why I was like, you got to look deeper into that. So thank you so much. It was awesome.
Well, yeah, thanks again for having me.
Of course. And to all those that have made it this far, thank you so much for joining us on the Urbanaut Podcast. If you like content like this, please consider liking, sharing, and commenting. That all supports our show. This also helps new viewers find the conversations and helps the artists that come on the show find new audiences. So please like, share, and comment. That helps the show. Also, if you feel compelled to help us to contribute to us in a little different way, you can also join our Patreon or be a paid subscriber on Spotify. That all helps support the show and brings new guests to you. And as always, we'll see you next time.